Hello GBA fans, it is Shroomraver here, and today we are going to be talking about the games that happened in the final week of the regular season, week 8 that is, of the GBA D-League Season 2. And of course, I am not alone in this endeavour. Today I am joined by my good friend Berkeley.
Hey, what's going on, everyone?
So, not 4 games to talk about, actually. We should say before we get into this, the first game that was supposed to happen was going to be the Arcaniners versus the Dolphinions. That is, of course, George Septile MC versus Hardy. Now, Hardy did forfeit that game, making it a 3-0 in favour of the San Francisco Arcaniners. Now, that was one of the games that didn't actually have an impact on the qualification process for the playoffs. So, a bit of a non-entity there. Sort of a final thing for both teams. Well, Dolphinions now, of course, very much out of it. And, of course, the Arcaniners already through. So, yeah, nothing really much to talk about there. We'll be focusing on the other 3 games from this week. 2 of which, the ones we'll talk about first, were qualification deciders. And then there was the other game, which was an experience. But we'll get onto that in a little bit. So the first game to talk about in full is going to be the Bouffant Bills and Makadi taking on Gassie's New York Shelmets. And this one did eventually run to the timer and resulted in a 4-3 victory for the Shelmets. The New York Shelmets taking that qualification spot for playoffs. Some interesting team building as we've come to expect from these two. Makadi bringing the combination of Excadrill and Hippowdon, but it wasn't Sand Rush Excadrill, it was Sand Force. Makadi, knowing that he would be outspeeding a lot of stuff with Excadrill anyway, from his opponent's team, decided to bring Sand Force just for that extra power. He was speed creeping with his offense, preventing it with his defense, putting a little bit of speed into the likes of that Hippowdon and the Umbreon that he brought. And we saw stuff like the powerful Tyrantrum with Strong Jaw, all of the Fang moves, and just the speed to outspeed the likes of Mega Ampharos. Now on Gassie's side, he was bringing the Rain again. This time he was bringing Calm Mind Manaphy. Very astute team building on his part. He's brought the Tail Glow before, but this time looking to be able to take special hits as well as possible with Manaphy. So bringing the Calm Mind, very nice decision. Scarf Chomp there to outspeed opposing Scarfers and to sort of check the Excadrill, which he knew could be a problem. And he was also looking to bring Trick Room Reuniclus, which he has done before to such great effect. This time he was rocking out with Recover instead of the coverage of the likes of Shadow Ball. Now, he was looking for it to be not worn down as much. He could have that nice, reliable recovery. And to be honest, he wasn't really fearing Slowbro, which Shadow Ball would be nice to hit, but Slowbro doesn't have the greatest special defense anyway. When faced with a Reuniclus, Reuniclus is going to be doing a lot of work to it. So getting into the game, we saw Gassie with a pretty strong start. You know, Manaphy was just putting all of the pressure onto Makadi, who was really scrambling early game, but he did manage to claw it back a little bit and trick that Scarf from Azelf onto Fortress. Looked like he was getting himself back into it. Which especially saw when Gassie had Manaphy in against the Excadrill, and, you know, Excadrill able to get massive damage onto the Manaphy. Eventually Gassie had to sack something off, and that was chosen to be Garchomp. With Garchomp gone, that would have allowed a lot of Volt Switching with impunity from the Mega Manectric of Makadi. But it wasn't all to go his way. Even though Excadrill ended up taking out Manaphy, Excadrill had to go down to his opponent's Weavile. Couldn't risk Weavile setting up a Swords Dance and just straight up sweeping him. So Will had to let his Excadrill go. And once that happened, Blissey really didn't have anything to fear. Especially when it took out Tyrantrum with Counter. Now I was worried about this because we saw Blissey rocking out with Counter and Seismic Toss and no status moves, meaning it would have been completely and utterly walled by the Dusclops of Makadi, which in the end he didn't actually end up bringing. So I was a bit worried about that Blissey set, but turned out well enough for the Shelmets, able to use Counter to take Tyrantrum out of the equation. And then, you know, as I say, Blissey really didn't have anything to fear. barring the final sort of last gasp explosion from Azov, which he went for on Reuniclus. Reuniclus lived it, set up a trick room, and could stall out Hippowdon, in a little bit of a trick room recovery war. But yeah, Blissey was able then to just stall out Will completely. There was nothing he could do to it. And in the end, it ran to the hour-long timer, at which point, mainly due to that Blissey, the Shelmets were up 4-3, and that was basically how the game ended.
Yeah, that's pretty much everything I got. I think it was very good team planning on the Shelmets. I know the Blissey, it doesn't have any status, so it can't hit the Dustclops, but you look at the teams, Bills can't really bring Dustclops this week. Shelmets have Weavile. Weavile hits the Bills team so hard, and he used it to put on a lot of offensive pressure this week. The fact that he did not have Sand Rush to outspeed the Weavile, yeah, he does outspeed most of the things, but I felt like outspeeding Weavile would have been nice, just because that thing can actually just pretty much kill Excadrill in one hit. For a lot of the beginning of the game, the Bills looked like they were on the upper foot. They're up 6-4. They killed off both the Manaphy and the Garchomp, two huge offensive pressures on the Shelmets team. Those are gone. Excadrill takes them both out fairly cleanly, but at that point he brings in the Weavile. The Bills cannot switch out, because if that Weavile is allowed to set up a sword stance, it sweeps. There's no Sand Rush on that Excadrill. So he stays in, he loses the Excadrill. That was one of three things that could kill the Blissey. Then Blissey goes for counter on the Tyrantrum, taking that out. Second thing down, Azelf is the last thing left. It can only go for Explosion on it. They had like Explosion, Ice Punch, U-Turn, and Trick. And he had previously tricked the Scarf onto the Fortress. Now, I think that might have been a little premature. It would have been nice to trick the Scarf onto the Blissey, absolutely crippling that thing, because the Fortress, I don't think, was nearly as big of a defensive threat to the Bills. I think he had things for that. Better than the Blissey. But he doesn't. He tricks it onto the Fortress. The Blissey, is just walling his team because he has a bunch of special attackers at that point. Reuniclus takes the explosion, lives, gets back up to HP, and it just becomes a stall war. And really, Gassy didn't really have too much for the Umbreon, and the Bills didn't have too much for the Blissey, but Gassy did have the 4-3 lead, and he was able to just timer stall out to win. And timer stalling, again, it's a strategy that I can see why someone would do that, especially in this format when you have 60 minutes. Generally, it's a strategy frowned upon on the ladder, but this is not the ladder, and I commend him for knowing what to keep alive and then taking that to victory. So, 4-3 for the Shelmets. He will be moving on to the playoffs. So, moving on, we have the Blazikens versus the Seattle Raptors. The Blazikens brought Mamoswine, Entei, Lucario, Mega Venusaur, Miltank, and Alakazam, and the Staraptors brought Mega Lopunny, Clefable, Salamence, Gourgeist, Crocodile, and Victini. The Blazikens were able to pull out a huge 5-0 victory against the Staraptors. There was some interesting team building on the Staraptor side. I don't really know what the Blazikens had. They did not put up their side, so we can only go off what the Staraptors had. He had an interesting Mega Lopunny set. Quick attack, no fake out this time. For the Alakazam, it could just basically quick attack, kill it off. It also had entrainment for the Cofagrigus. It allowed it to actually hit the Cofagrigus. You entrain Scrappy onto it, and then you don't have to worry about getting Mummy. Mummy is one of the ways Cofagrigus can wall the Mega Lopunny. He also had a specially defensive Salamence, defensive Clefable, as always, sub-bulk up on his Crocodile, Choice Specs Victini, and Gourgeist was, well, fat, defensive. So this battle, it starts out kind of slow. The Gourgeist is out against the Mega Venusaur. It misses the Will-O-Wisp first turn, and that's kind of set the pace for this battle. Luck is not going to be in the Staraptor's favor, nor is the offensive momentum. You can see immediately misses the Will-O-Wisp, and he's taking Sludge Bombs from that thing, and Gourgeist is not a wall for Mega Venusaur. Yeah, it can absorb the Grass type moves and the Leaf Seed, but it cannot take the Sludge Bomb. So it takes 2 Sludge Bombs, has to switch out of there. Salamence is the special wall for the Staraptors. Sludge Bomb still does quite a lot, so that seemed like a more offensive Mega Venusaur, which I think is a good choice for the Blazikens, just because they have a lot of defense this week, a lot of things with Thick Fat. Half their team had Thick Fat, Mamoswine, Mega Venusaur, and the Miltank. You could tell he was kind of scared about the Victini. He's got all these things to wall it. Does not bring the Hydreigon, though, which physical Victini, Hydreigon kind of just walls the hell out of that thing. Roost, Dark Pulse, good luck trying to break through that. But he doesn't bring it. Apparently he didn't need it this week, so lucky for him. Nick, though, throughout the early to mid game, he's making a lot of offensive switches, keeping Gearhart on the back foot, having to switch in between his Clefable and his Salamence. Clefable, Salamence, those are the only 2 things coming in, because he'd Heal Bell away the paralysis on the Salamence, switch back in the Salamence, get paralyzed again. Go for Roost, switch out of Clefable, and that was doing a lot for the first half of the match. Eventually, Staraptors, since they're not putting out much offense, he decides to finally switch in the Victini. Choice Specs Victini, he switches it on Stealth Rocks into the Miltank. He goes for a Choice Spec Psychic. He over-predicted. I think he had Focus Blast, could have taken out the Miltank, but he goes for the Psychic. It does a massive amount of damage and then gets paralyzed. Then he switches out his Victini. He could have taken out the Miltank, but he switches it out into the Clefable again to Heal Bell, releasing any sort of offensive momentum he might have had at that point. And this is how the match goes. He loses all offensive momentum. He eventually brings in the sub-bulk up. He does his HP EVs wrong, and a Seismic Toss is able to break the sub. With a sub being broken from one Seismic Toss, he's not allowed to set up the bulk ups as he wanted to. With that being broken, the Entei can come in, and he goes for a Sacred Fire. Gearhart switches out. He switches into Victini, takes more rocks damage, takes the Sacred Fire, switches back out to the Crocodile, sacks off the Crocodile, then switches into his Lopunny, which does not have Fake Out. Mega Evolves. The Entei outspeeds at that point because regular Lopunny is not that fast. It dies to 1 Sacred Fire. Then he switches into Victini. It gets off a fairly decent hit and then dies to Sacred Fire itself. At that point, the Staraptors lost. They lost all their offense. They had Clefable left, they had a specially defensive Salamence, and they had Gourgeist. There's no offense left. Nick still has everything left. It's 6-3. The Clefable comes in, it T-waves the Entei, it gets paralyzed. I don't think it gets paralyzed. It misses a Sacred Fire. He's able to take out the Entei, and then in comes Lucario, special Lucario, and it just cleans out the match. Everything else dies. It sets up a nasty plot and is able to one-shot the Clefable, the Gourgeist, and the Salamence. And that was the game. Staraptors not really using the offense that they've been given. I feel like if they they've been shoehorning their really offensive mons in defensive roles, and I feel like, maybe a more offensive style would put a lot of pressure on the Blazikens, because you look at their team, there's a lot of things to try to take on Victini, and he's prepared really well for it. So, not much left to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Gearhart, we've seen him sort of, these hints of him bringing some really intuitive thoughts to his team building. We've seen it before where he's been looking to bring these different things and try and get them to work. The ideas are really nice. Like, we saw him bringing quick attack this time on Lopunny. As Berkeley has said, there was no fake out on Lopunny this time. He was bringing quick attack and wasn't trying to speed creep the Alakazam. Instead, packing the quick attack to try and do massive damage to it. I like the entrainment idea, unfortunately destined not to work, as Cofagrigus wasn't coming this week. And, it was nice to give Gourgeist a first run out. And Specs Victini has a time and a place, When you think Victini, you just think V-Create clickbait. There's a good time and a good place for Specs Victini. Maybe this wasn't it. Maybe it was just better to be going with the power of the physical set. But it's nice that he was giving it that try, because it's certainly not the thing you expect to see. I like the idea of sub-bulk up Crocodile. It's just a shame that, unfortunately, I think Gearhart's explanation was the fact that as far as HP rolls go with Sab and Seismic Toss, it's more inclined to have favoured him in that situation, whereby Seismic Toss would go for the lower one, whereas I think Substitute would have gone for the higher one. But unfortunately, it didn't work out for him, and he wasn't able to get that strategy off. Yeah, and Nick was playing a very good game. I'm not sure that Gearhart was playing a horrible game. He was doing the only thing he could. Like, Nick was absolutely forcing him into this position where he had to play the most defensive game available to him. All he could do was switch between Salamence and Clefable, and as Berkeley's been saying, it just wasn't productive and it wasn't working for him. But it was all he could do. He was forced by Nick not to go offensive. Nick just didn't let him do it. In the end, Gearhart had to make those sort of riskier switches into Victini and into Crook. Now, they did work, in so much as he got them in safely. Unfortunately, unable to take advantage of them. Nick, it just seemed, just had things for Gearhart's things. As soon as Clefable comes in, he's got a Mega Venusaur. Same thing for Gourgeist. Miltank seems to be able to wall everything else he had, or at least take a hit and then go for a Thunderwave and heal itself up with Milk Drink, and so the process repeats itself. And yeah, it's just another sign of Nick being able to know what he needs to win. We saw Entei completely take apart Gearhart's offensive core, and then we saw Lucario do exactly the same thing with his defensive lot. Knowing that he needed to save those, knowing exactly what he needed them for, Entei was able to rip through those offensive mons. And yeah, he saved Lucario for the end with the coverage. I think I pinpointed Lucario as a possibility in this match, and I'm glad to see it putting in work, have to say. And yeah, unfortunate for the Raptors that they were forced into this kind of defensive game that he didn't want to play, but he didn't have too much of a choice. Very well played once again by Nick and the Blazikens. Once again, we've seen him start the season not particularly fantastically, but he's had a very strong finish and has managed, deservedly so, to get himself into the playoffs with that win. So, those were the two games that sort of mattered in so much as they determined who the other qualifying positions would go to. So, we shall move on to the final game of the week. And my, what a game it was. So join us on this journey as we go through Ellie and the Accrington Stantlers versus Mike, M&J TV, and the Houston Gastros. So, this game, we will say first off, ended in a 6-0. A 6-0 victory for the Houston Gastros. So let's take a look at some of the choice picks for sets that we were running with. First up, Ellie, bringing Sub-Punch Explosion Regirock and a Mega Sableye with Metronome and Dig. We should keep saying, by the way, this game, as far as qualifying goes, didn't matter. Ellie had already qualified, and Mike, unfortunately, was already out. So they could bring this weird stuff. They'd said before they were going to bring the weird stuff, and my god, did they deliver. Because then you go into Mike, and he had some weird stuff and some really nasty, evil stuff. We had Swagger Foul Play Spiritomb, and the classic Para-Flinching Togekiss. We also had Transform Mew and Banded Raikou. Absolutely beautiful. They were all bringing the fun stuff. Spiritomb turned out to be a major issue for Ellie, because whilst Sub-Punch Explosion Stealth Rock Regirock is fun, it's walled by ghost types. It can do nothing to them. And that was a problem for her. She was looking to, one of her main things was passing an agility into a Swords Dance Sandslash. Rather unfortunately, she managed to get the agility baton pass off into Sandslash, on the... What was it? Not the Regirock, that was hers. The Spiritomb. And as Sandslash went for a Swords Dance, Spiritomb got the burn off with the Willow. So Sandslash went for another Swords Dance, and Spiritomb promptly destroyed it with Foul Play. Which was unfortunate, and Ellie was very much left crawling in her skin. So then there was just more ridiculous shenanigans. Ellie pulling all kinds of moves with Metronome. Managed to get a Fusion Bolt Metronome as Mike switched into Togekiss, and it came close to doing damage. It really did. It was very close to causing damage. But then then Togekiss was able to kind of do its thing. Latias got flinched 4 times in a row, and promptly KO'd by an eventual Air Slash. Scizor got paralysed twice in a row, one of them being a Bullet Punch onto it, and eventually that went down to Togekiss as well. And then Ellie went out like an absolute champion, going for Explosion on the switch into Spiritomb. And I don't think there's too much more to add to that. A 6-0 victory for the Gastros.
Yeah, so this... Oh my god, this battle. Man. Last week, and they're really going out with a bang. Ellie went out with a bang for the regular season. And, yeah, Regirock Sub-Punch Explosion with Stealth Rocks. I don't know why she needed Stealth Rocks. I guess she just really didn't want to hit the Spiritomb. But, that's a thing. Metronome Sableye, it gets a Psycho Boost against the Togekiss, and I think it does about 30 damage. It then gets a Fusion Flare and does about 10 damage. So, and it also had Power Up Punch and I think Thunder Punch. So really, really a choice set right there. Dig Sableye. I didn't even know Mega Sableye got Dig, but apparently it does. And unfortunately, we didn't really get to see much of the Choice Banded Raikou. It went for 1 Bulldoze against the Regirock, did negligible damage. That was Choice Banded. So, very, very interesting. One of my favorite turns is Sableye gets switched in, Spiritomb swaggers it on the switch in, it goes for Dig, and then slaps itself in the face on the second turn of the Dig, doing absolutely nothing. Actually, it dealt good damage to itself. I love the part where the paralyzed Scizor goes for agility, and everyone's probably thinking, why is a paralyzed Scizor going for agility? It's not going to outspeed anything anymore. And then it baton passes in the Sandslash. It gets burned after the first Swords Dance. Goes for a second Swords Dance. Foul Play takes it out from 88%. Clean takes it out. No problem. And then Togekiss, and this is why I hate Togekiss. I hate Togekiss. It paralyzes everything and then para-flinches everything. And this is why I hate Togekiss. And the Gastros bring everything that I absolutely despise, being swagger and para-flinch. So this was a battle. This was a battle. And didn't think it was gonna go out like this. Mike, if you're watching, Mew does indeed, after Transform, if you switch out, Transform does go away. He transformed again into the Heliolisk. Take the Heliolisk down with a Hyper Voice with his own Mew/Heliolisk. Some interesting turns. And the reason his Heliolisk did more damage is just because Mew has more HP than Heliolisk. So it looked like it did more damage, about the same. And yep, and then the last thing I got is Regirock Suicides right into the Spiritomb, going out with a bang to get 6-0'd. I just, one thing I loved about this battle is how the Gastros, they could have let something, he saw the explosion coming. He saw the explosion coming, and he could have let something go down, but he instead goes into the Spiritomb. He saw it coming. He's just like, you know what? We're going to end this with a 6-0. Not even a 5-0. He wanted revenge from last time. And he gets the 6-0. And that was one of the funniest matches I'd ever seen. I was just like, what the hell is going on throughout the entire match? And it was hilarious. They did not disappoint. But anyway... moving on to the league leaders. We have not much of a change from last week, in fact. Actually, the top three remain the same from last week. We have, at number 1, we have the Reuniclus. On the Shelmets, coached by Gassy. It is still 9-0 with a +9 differential. It did not move last week. It was also 9-0 with a +9 differential. And it's still number 1. It hasn't died at all. Maybe in the playoffs it will. Maybe not. But still rather impressive that Reuniclus, after 8 weeks, is number 1 in the league. At number 2, another thing that hasn't moved from last week, it couldn't because there was no match. It is Hitmonlee on the San Francisco Arcanines, coached by George. It is 8-1 with a +7 differential because the Arcanines did not play. Hitmonlee obviously couldn't get any kills or deaths, so it's just saying at that nice +7 differential. At number 3, we also have another Arcaniners teammate, the Zapdos. It is 7-0 with a +7 differential. Still sitting there, could not get any kills, could not get any deaths this week because there was no match. But moving on to 4 through 10.
Yeah, and at 4, we have Crobat of Makadi's Bouffant Bills. That another no-shower this week, but it does move up a place by virtue of the one that went down below it. So Crobat still sitting at 10-5 with the +5 differential. At 5, we have Scizor of Ellie's Accrington Stantlers. No KOs this week for it after that particular game. Did go down, so it is currently sitting at 9-4 with a +5 differential. In at 6, another non-mover, I believe, we have Goodra of George Septile MC's Arcaniners at 6-1 with +5. At 7 is another, funnily enough, San Francisco Arcaniner, Landorus Incarnate, with 8-4 at +4. And here's where the changes start to happen. Sitting at joint 8th, we have 2 of the Washington Blazikens. Nick, Mighty Mamoswine, with Entei and Lucario, after very strong performances, both going up to 7-3 with a +4 differential each, so they are joint 8th. And in at number 10, we have Exploud from Makadi's Bouffant Bills, sitting at 7-4 with a +3 differential. Just before we sort of focus in on them again, there are 2 other mons at +3, that being Mega Manectric of the Bouffant Bills and Mega Sizzle of the San Francisco Arcaniners at 5-2 and 4-1 respectively. They just miss out on the top 10 this week. But yeah, some very interesting mons there. Not a lot of change going on. A lot of no-showers from last week. Really nice to see those 2 Blazikens, Entei and Lucario, representing their team, coming in at joint 8th with 7-3. Very strong showing from the Blazikens in the week just gone, and especially from those 2, kind of cleaning up between them. But other than that, not an awful amount of change.
No. I guess we'll move on to the divisions. In the yellow division, we have at number 1, as they have been pretty much this entire season. We have the San Francisco Arcaniners, 7 wins, 1 loss, 26 differential. Yeah, that's a massive differential. They were at 23. They got a 3-0 win because of the forfeit. Now they're at 26. They are a clean 18 differential above the next team, which is the New York Shelmets at 6-2 with a +8 differential. They have also qualified for the playoffs, and not much to say about them. The Bills are next at 5-3 with a +4 differential. They lost to the Shelmets this week, so they are out of the playoffs, unfortunately for them. And at last, and I feel bad, he forfeited, so we have the Delphinions at 0-8 with a -29 differential. Yeah, he was out of the playoffs. I think he mathematically eliminated a few weeks ago. And Arcaniners were just so dominant this season. You look at their differential, only lost once. It's going to be a good playoffs.
Very much so. And so now we'll have a look at the Crystal Division, see who is joining the Arcaniners and the Shelmets. And at the top of the Crystal Division, we have Ellie and the Accrington Stantlers sitting at 5-3 with a +4 differential, despite the 6-0 drubbing from the final game, which of course didn't particularly matter in the grand scheme of things. They end off at +4. Joining them, of course, Nick, Mighty Mammothswine, and the Washington Blazikens. Strong end to the season from them, putting them at 4-4 with a -1 differential, but it's enough to see them through to the playoffs. Just above the Seattle Star Raptors and Gearhart, he finishes with 3-5 and a -10 differential. And bringing up the rear, even after that big 6-0, we have the Houston Gastros, M&J TV, Mike with a 2-6 record, and again a -1 differential, which is pretty impressive. Given 2 wins and 6 losses, to have a -1 differential, he's been playing very well this season. His losses tend to have been sort of quite close, and whilst that differential will have been helped out a fair bit by the big win at the end of the season, it's still a very impressive record. When it's been that sort of a losing record, to have -1 will be very nice, and he'll be heartened by that, I think.
His differential just a little bit padded by that last match.
Yeah, just a little bit, I think we would say. Just a tad. Yeah, so I think with that, we'll probably move on to see who we have in the playoff games. Very interesting games to come. Now, the playoffs, as we understand it, are divisional. So the 2 qualifiers from Yellow Division will play each other, and the 2 from Crystal Division will play each other. So, the first game is going to be Septile MC, George, and the San Francisco Arcaniners taking on Super Gassy's New York Shelmets. Always a good game to see these 2 play against each other. What do we think is going to happen in this game?
Well, last time they played, it was a sweep. It was a 4-0 sweep on the Arcaniners side. I'm going to give it to the Arcaniners again. They've just been way too dominant. Their only loss was against the Bills this season. They've already beaten the Shelmets twice already. I think they're going to be able to pull out the 3rd win. It's going to be close. I think it's going to be much closer than it was last time. I think Gassy and the Shelmets, they're going to patch up some of those problems they had playing the Arcaniners last week. But the Arcaniners they're a crafty team. They think of some pretty amazing strategies that to most people doesn't sound like they'd work because they seem very situational. But this format is the game of situations. And the Arcaniners, very good at it. So I think they're going to pull out the win. Maybe a 2-0. Not looking too big of a differential.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a close one. On paper, you've got to be giving it to the Arcaniners, winning the last matchup in fairly dominant fashion. However, I think that the Shelmets have something they can do here. The Shelmets in their last game proved that he can play a long game very well. And I don't think the long game suits George's style. I don't think he wants to play the long game. So what I think the Shelmets will be looking to do is force him into that position where he has to play that long, more defensive game. It suits the Shelmets better than it suits the Arcaniners, and I think if Gassy can do that, he will stand a real chance. However, is George going to let him do that? I don't think he's going to. I think he's going to be trying his damnedest not to let Gassy do that. If he can, then it's going to be even closer, and that will give the Shelmets a very nice chance. In the end, I really rather fancy the Arcaniners for this. They have just been so dominant this season. Close game, probably around a 2-0. I'm going to have to agree with you on that, and I will just pip it towards the Arcaniners, unless the Shelmets can force him into that role that he doesn't want to assume.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this first battle.
Yeah.
Even more so, I am also looking forward to the second battle of the playoffs. We have the Accrington Santlers against the Washington Blazikens. How do you feel about this match?
Oh, ho, ho, ho. This is a very, very juicy match. Ellie and Nick, very much rivals, you know. Their games are always very interesting to watch. We've seen some very interesting stall. Well, interesting stall is kind of a sort of difference of terms. But we've seen stall being played by them. We've seen massive offense at the end game being played by them. And yeah, these two are very much divisional rivals. They would be rivals even if they weren't in the same division. Some interesting battling history between the two of them. Now, Nick has been playing well towards the end of the season. We've seen it before. He has a sort of not particularly great start, and then he finishes very strongly. Ellie has been looking good throughout, with those few losses. Never, there was never a time where she looked really, really in terrible form. So this is going to be a very, very interesting game. I can see Ellie looking to bring some viable gimmicks, as opposed to metronome. And I can see the Blazikens looking to go even more offensive, because it seemed to be working for him last time. Despite the fact that Ellie took the win last time these two met, Nick's offense was looking very strong. So I think this is going to be a very offensive game. I also think this is probably going to be a very short game, if I had to put money on it. Who do I think is going to win? Close game. I'm going to put it on 1-0 to the Stantlers.
Oh, man. Listen, I don't know what you're talking about. Metronome, very viable. She just has to pull out some more fusion flares, and I think that can catch Nick off guard. Yeah, it's like you look at Ellie, and she only went 5-3, and I say only, like that's a bad thing. But one loss was this past week, where she went she got 6-0'd because she brought interesting sets, to say the least. And her other loss was she had a forfeit because she was at EGX. So she only actually had like one loss this season. Who knows if she would have actually lost that battle where she had a forfeit. We don't know, but not important. She's been doing extremely good this season, and she's looking very strong going into this playoffs. Yes, she did just get 6-0'd, but she had Sub Punch, Explosion, Regirock, and Metronome, Dig, Mega Sableye. You really expect any different? I didn't, but their battles have, I think one was pretty close. The other one was just kind of heavily in Ellie's favor. She's just been playing so well, and granted, the Blazikens, they're coming off a huge win this past week. He has been patching up the holes he needs to in his own play style. He's getting into playing the early game. He doesn't generally do well early in the game. He starts getting much better towards the late game. This past match, he was good throughout. I didn't see any problem with his playing throughout the entire time. If he plans as well as he did last week, he's going to give Ellie a huge run for her money. It's very hard to win against someone 3 times in this format. with almost no change in the teams, it's extremely hard. And at the same time, it's going to be, I think, very creative sets from Ellie, which she's known for doing, and she's been doing extremely well. And I think it's going to be a little bit more straightforward playing from the Blazikens. I'm going to have to agree with you. I'm going to go with a very close win for the Stantlers. But the way Nick's been playing, I can honestly kind of see it tip the other way. But I'm going to hedge my bets with Ellie with this week. Probably a 1-0.
Yeah, just a little final note on that that sort of thing you mentioned. Difficult to be winning 3 times against the same opponent. The one other thing that Nick is going to have to get over is the sort of mental block of having lost to the same team twice. And it's the same. It did. I think the Shelmets did beat the Arcaniners once, so it's not so much of an issue for Gassy.
Not this season.
Not this season?
The Arcaniners lost to the Bills.
In
a very close 1-0.
In that case,
same with the Shelmets. They haven't lost. They lost twice to the Arcaniners.
So in that case, it's the same kind of thing for Gassy as it is for Nick. These teams, they've lost to their playoff opponents twice before, and that's a big mental block that they've got to get over. It's, I've lost to this team twice. I tried to maybe bring something new the second time, it didn't work. What else have I got? What else have these two coaches of the Shelmets and the Blazikens got to give against a team that has taken them out twice before? And that's going to be interesting to see if they can bring anything even more different that is going to give them the edge. But that is the story for next week, because we are pretty much going to wrap things up here. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We do hope that you have enjoyed. Look out for those 2 playoff games on our coaches' channels. They will presumably be going up sometime later on this week once those games have happened. So do look out for them, as well as all the other analytical videos you need to keep up to date with the D-League on this channel, also coming up this week. But as I say, we're going to get out of here. Any final things to add, Mr. Berkeley?
I'm just looking forward to the 2 battles this week. It's the playoffs. The playoffs are finally here.
Yeah.
It's been 8 weeks. Very competitive. I mean, you look at the yellow division. You have 3 teams, 7-6-5 in wins. Very strong. Granted, Delphinions. I'm sorry, Hardy. You didn't do well. Not much else to say about that. The Crystal division, again, 5-4-3-2. It's very segmented wins. It's very close. It's been a close race this whole time. This week, 2 of the matches were playoff qualifiers. How often do you get the last week 2 of the matches count for who actually makes the playoffs? Half, that's going to count for half the playoffs. This season did not disappoint. I'm impressed with every team, how they've planned and played, and I'm looking forward to the playoffs.
Yeah, as am I, and we hope that you are too, because it's going to be fantastic. These battles are going to be absolutely excellent, towards the pinnacle of what you can see in this kind of format competitively. So make sure that you keep an eye out for those battles, as we say, going up sometime towards the end of this week. But that is going to be it from us. We are going to get out of here, so our final thank you to you all for watching. I've been Shroomraver, he has been Berkeley, and yeah, with that I guess we will see you all next time. So take care, GBA fans. We'll see you next time.